Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe, and welcome to the final part of the Airfix Beaver project. In the last episode we built the model, and in this episode we're going to paint the model, and everything starts with a primer coat. This is Mr. Servicer 1500, and I think it's a good idea to use a primer if you've done a fair amount of scribing, riveting, filling, sanding and all that kind of stuff, because it is going to reveal all those imperfections that otherwise you may not see with just the bare plastic. So I think it's definitely worth doing. It's a relatively thin coat, and none of the detail is going to be obscured or softened by this layer, and obviously you can thin it yourself to whatever thickness, but I like it quite thin. And there is the final result, all ready for the camouflage. So the painting of this model started with the underside, and all the paints I used were MRP. Using the standard Southeast Asia colours. Unfortunately, I haven't got the FS numbers to hand, but I think they're very easy to find them. The underside is this very light grey off-white colour. And as per my usual technique, I'll put a solid coat down first, so no pre-shading, anything like that. I prefer to do post-shading, so that always starts for me with a solid opaque base coat. This MRP is extremely thin. If you haven't used it before, I can highly recommend it. It's ready to use as it comes out of the bottle. Most colours are, pretty much all colours, are very opaque. There's only one or two that are less so, but all the ones for this are absolutely fine. Because it's very thin, you can't flood the surface. It's very hot as well. It's a lacquer type paint, and when I say lacquer, I mean it thins with lacquer solvents. It's actually officially an acrylic, because that's the pigment is acrylic, but I think most modelers tend to use the kind of layman's terms for lacquers. So they are lacquers. It's very hot stuff. So if you do flood it, if you have any layers underneath, then they are going to be affected. So I just use a very low pressure and I just build up the coats. It goes down fairly shiny actually. It's definitely not matte. It's not gloss, so it's not like uber shiny. I'll say it's just mainly a sort of very smooth coat. So here's the post shading, and using a lightened version of the base coat, which is practically white. I think white would just be too stark if you're just going to use actual white. So I did add white to the base coat. I don't know the ratios, and really it doesn't matter. You're just doing it by eye, and there you can see the sort of faded effect. Now the tan colour, and again this is FS blah blah blah, whatever it is for the American Southeast Asia tan. You'll note that I've masked off the underside. The purple tape is actually really good stuff. It's from Ammo and it's low tack, and it's great for things like this, especially if you've used the hairspray technique and then you're having to go in and mask over the top. The tape can lift because of the hairspray, but yeah, this low tack is less risk of that. I haven't used any hairspray on this, but you know, I just thought I'd use it. And again, I'm going in to get a solid coat now, and we'll go in and we'll pre-shade that later. And you see that I'm just very roughly marking out the camouflage pattern. This is going to have some large areas of green on the wings in a sort of stripy pattern, so it was easy enough just to do roughly where the, the green's going to go and leave that in primer. the fuselage, as you'll see in a minute, is a very complicated scheme, so that was just easier just to do that one complete layer. There we are. That is the initial tan coat done. Now for the fun bit, and this is the green. And I'm going to do a lot of freehand spraying here. So what I do for air pressure, first of all, is turn the air pressure as far down as I can, but still get a nice atomization of the paint. If you go a little bit too far by turning the air pressure down, it is going to start spitting and speckling at you. Too high, and you're literally going to clean where the paint's going, because of all the lacquer thinner that's in the paint. Doing the demarcation first, you can see I've taken the cap off the nozzle. That means I'm going to get a cleaner, tighter spray pattern. And now I'm just going in, filling in the rest of the areas. What I tend to do is up the air pressure ever so slightly when filling in. I just find it covers a lot better. And by doing that, you can see it's being held further away, because you can't even see the airbrush at all. Trust me, it is there. So that was the wings. That was all done in the same method. Now for the fuselage, and this is really complicated. So I'm using the decal sheet as a guide from Extra Decal. I couldn't actually find a photo of this particular aeroplane, but I did find some other ones on the internet, and I cross-referenced for those as well. Each pattern was unique on these aeroplanes. They were just painted in the field, but it is a really fun task actually doing this. So I'm just breaking the model up into areas. Obviously I've done the top of the rear fuselage there, and now I'm just doing the tail fin. And slightly different technique to doing the sort of bands in the bigger areas, in that I'll start applying the paint, and then I'll just make that small spot bigger, and I'll expand it in the directions I want. So this is almost like sort of analogous to the sort of German modelling here, where you've got the tight big models. It's a little bit spotty and lumpy in some places, and a little bit more stripy in others. And I was pleased to say I didn't have any accidents on this. So if you do slip, or you accidentally do a little bit too big an area, you just go in with the other colour. And MRP, it's quite a dense pigment. It covers really nicely, so there's no worries at all with lighter colours going over darker colours, correcting overspray, things like that, or even actually doing the camouflage the other way around. You can do that very successfully, and I have done in the past. This area here was a little bit more awkward, because the diagram in the decal sheet didn't actually line up in places with the sort of top surface and the side surface, so had to use a bit of artistic license here and there, just manipulating the patterns just so they met actually, because it looked a bit weird otherwise. This is a slightly bigger area of green now going on down the bottom. So again, I've reverted to something almost like I've done on the wings, where I've done the demarcation and now I'm just filling in the gaps. So relatively awkward at the front end because obviously it's a high-winged aeroplane. It's got the fixed undercarriage there. And you do need to get the airbrush in really very close, as you can see, for that nice tight pattern to minimise the overspray. So trying to do this on camera as well to get everything lined up so you can actually see what I'm doing was a bit of a challenge. But yeah, it all worked out in the end. Stripy wheel spats now, and again I just paid attention to the decal sheet instructions. And there's the left-hand fuselage finished, and you can see how shiny the paint is. So you could probably get away with no gloss coat down at all. Right, talking of decals, these were the extra decals, and unfortunately, having had great success in the past with extra decals, these were not. These were rubbish, actually. They had no adhesion at all, really, to the surface, and you'll see that maybe in a bit. So, doing my usual, putting the set down, and then rolling the excess off, trying to push it into the surface detail, but I did find that the decal was moving, and I've not had this before. They just didn't want to stick at all, which made it really quite awkward. Luckily, there's only a few decals on this, not much stenciling, if any. And you can see there, I've just chucked some of the set over the top. See there, trying to get it to conform and push into that detail. This was a bit awkward as well, because it went over the rudder hinge, which is obviously a very deep line. So I squeezed it as hard as I could, really, to try and push it into that detail, and then using a relatively fresh blade, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and cut the decal over the hinge line without moving the decal, because if the decal moves whilst you're cutting, that could be a bit of a pain. And then checking more of the setting solution over the top. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is actually the sole, but using the setting solution over the top, that's what Microset recommend. You put set underneath the decal, put your decal down, do what you need to do with cotton buds and pressure and blah blah blah, and then go in with another layer of set before you go in with a layer of sole. Now the ammo sole is relatively strong. It's one of the stronger ones out there, and yeah, it didn't have much effect on these, if I'm honest. At least when I went in with a scalpel blade later, they'd actually stuck. So that was a bit of an advantage. And you can see I'm being quite liberal with this stuff here. And it does tend to bead up as well. You can see things are moving around. And it does bead up, yeah. So you do have to be careful. Right, now for some detail painting. As you saw in the previous episode, the tail wheel is all in one piece, which is fine, but it just means that you've got to go with some careful painting with a brush. These are ammo acrylics, which I find really, really good for brush painting, actually. They flow really nicely. This bit, as you can see, it's quite chunky, but the real one was, and it wasn't that awkward to get in there actually with it actually mounted on the model. I suppose it would have been easier doing it off the model, but no, I just wanted a strong bond and glue it on there before I started painting. Now onto the weathering, and here's the Ammo oil brusher, black oil paint, just brushing it into the control surfaces, the ailerons and flaps, and this will all be polished off when it's dry. Just using the applicator brush, why not? It works quite well. I know some people have complained that their brushes frayed and all that kind of stuff, but I've never ever had a problem with mine. I just make sure that I just look after it, and when it goes back in all neat and tidy. So this is making the sludge wash now. You can see this is a sort of browny, slightly greeny tone. And what I tend to do is mix up a colour that complements the colour underneath and just do it there. I know some people just use a single colour all over, but I prefer to do this way because the colours have to complement each other, because if they don't, it looks a bit daft. And especially when you've got a very light and a very dark colour like here, you know, if you pick a tone that's in the middle, the contrast is going to be all wrong, and maybe all wrong for both. So you know, too dark on the tan, and then it's going to be the wrong way around. It's going to be too light on the dark green. So this is why I do this way, avoiding the markings, as you can see as well. And I'm just working it into the surface, working it into the rivets, and I want a tone where the contrast is not too great. And obviously quite fiddly on a camouflage like this, where on the fuselage especially it's actually quite small, the brown areas. Now for the green, and various oil brusher tones going in, and it's just trial and error. And you can even try it on the model, see what it looks like, and if you need to line it up or darken it, or colours don't quite match, you can just adjust it in the little cap. So a very dark green tone here, like a black green going on. And again, just working it into the rivets, and then with this brush just following the colour demarcation as close as I can. Again, avoiding some of the markings because the contrast will be wrong. And then removing it, so you can see a sort of mid-grey colour on the underside, and I'm just removing some of that green and some of that brown from the underside colour. So I leave it for, well, at least sort of an hour really to start to dry off. Obviously oil paint takes days to dry properly. But when it's sort of dry to the touch, I quite often use a hairdryer as well, just to speed things up. And just using the kitchen towel, and I'm just going to rub away the excess. So as you can see, I don't use this in the direction of the airflow blah, because when you look at aeroplanes, dirt and grime will quite often do that. However, the when you're just doing sort of general weathering like this, yeah, you don't want like a streaky aeroplane all over. It's just not realistic. So going in with that tone underneath, I wanted a nice warm tone because the base colour is quite warm. So this had a little bit of brown added to it just to warm things up. And again, going for a contrast that complements, so it's not too dark. And if it's too light, it's not going to show up. Now, I've got to be quite careful now because I've glued in place the flap and aileron hinge things. It'd be quite easy to knock them out if I'm not careful. So taking a little bit of care here. And the best tool to get in there is a cotton bud. Gives you much more control. You can get right up to the detail. And what I have used in the past as well sometimes is a paintbrush, and you just go in there and blend away. And this is a really messy job, actually. It's quite easy to get fingerprints, but you know that's easily dealt with. You just wipe them away. But I always wash my hands before. I always wash my hands afterwards. Now we can start putting the final bits and pieces on. So the engine, as you saw in the last episode, that was drilled and pinned, as was the nose. So just taking care to line the engine up properly, and then once it's in place, I'll give it a wash. So this is just some black panel line wash from Ammo, and going over the A-stand, the Ammo A-stand steel. I think that looks really quite nice. First steps were scratch built from this wire stuff, just using the kit parts as a pattern, and then once they were glued in place, they had a coat of the metal 4K metal prep from VMS, which is brilliant stuff. It's a metal primer. It proper etches into the metal, and paint really does stick to it. It's really good stuff. I'm so glad I got some of that. You can see the exhaust is put into place as well. And I'm just touching it in with the brush now. The struts, they were just a tiny bit of glue. That was all that was needed. This sort of pitot thing that went on, that's just Albin Alloy's brass rod. I had drilled into the leading edge of the fin. That's quite fiddly because it's very easy for the drill bit to slip. And you can see on the top of the fuselage there some various lumps and bumps, all scratch built from plastic card, maybe a bit of filler as well. Aerials, these were sort of communications and very basic Lint type aeroplanes, hence all the aerials. And check the references because it seems that every single aeroplane was different and could be changed as well in the configuration. So that's just a bit of steel wire going on. Quite funky, that. And pretty much the last bit to go on was the propeller. And there it is. What a pretty little aeroplane. And I hope you enjoyed that. It's only a two-parter, but it really was a lot of fun. This model comes, it's actually a year older than me, and the aim was to try and elevate it to a modern, to look like a modern tooling and a modern model. But yeah, Did I achieve it? I think I got close. I can see areas in the model that I'm not happy with. Some of the riveting is a little bit wonky, if I'm honest. And yeah, I think when I make another one, and I'm planning to, I know where I can improve things. So I really hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you on the next project. So cheers, bye bye.